Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be checking out Superman 78, The Metal Curtain Issue 4 by Robert Venditti and Gavin Guidry. Superman goes another round with Metallo as the villain arrives in Washington, calling out the hero for a more public fight this time round. Again, this was another issue that didn't have a lot of meat to it. It also feels like Venditti is moving through the story really quite quickly, since just last issue we were told that Metallo won't be fighting Superman just yet, since the Russians needed the right moment. So it was seemingly being set up like there would be at least one or two issues where Metallo was maybe working in the background to undermine Superman and the American government in the eyes of the rest of the world, building dissent against the hero and the country, the usual stuff you get in these sorts of stories. But we jumped straight into the big battle this issue. Last issue even ended with the Daily Planet outright admitting that the Russians were behind the attack on the American spy plane in issue 2, something which Venditti kind of just drops. It's never once brought up, and that could have easily have been the thing that brings these characters together. We could have had Metallo see that paper and discovering what Lois has done and going against his handlers, kind of going rogue to go and try and take her out before she reveals their plan to the rest of the world before they are ready, and that ends up with them fighting with Superman. That could have been your big setup, but it just wasn't. The effects of kryptonite also have seemingly changed too from last issue, as when Superman was initially exposed to it, it did this really kind of cool thing where it weakened him, but it also started making him have like cold sweats and gave him sort of PTSD nightmares of Metallo and his attack. And this is all because he hasn't really tangled with weaponized kryptonite in this form in this universe as of yet. So it was like this kind of new angle on kryptonite and what it can do to Superman, and I like that it kind of shocked the hero. This issue, it barely affected him, save for one panel where he kind of is on a bit of a wobbly feet sort of situation, but then that kind of just goes away in the next panel. Again, there could have been this kind of cool arc in the background where Superman comes to terms with the fact that there are now things on Earth that can violently hurt him, and him trying to figure out a way to combat these so he can continue to help people, since if he gets sick and gets weakened, people could and will die, so he can't have that happen. That could have been a really cool story with that. Superman of course confronts Metallo and a big battle ensues, with Superman only being saved by the deadly kryptonite blasts of Metallo by Lex Luthor, who contacts the hero again by the frequency they share, and something we've seen in the films and in the first volume of this book, and tells Superman all about the override switch on the suit, since he built the suit so he knows how to turn it off. This kind of feels like a cheap Deus Ex Machina situation, of course there's a button on the suit that just happens to turn it off when Superman needs it. But then this is also something you would probably see in a cheaply made Superman movie from the mid-80s, so it fits well within the world this comic inhabits. But again, I just can't help but feel it is a little cheap, especially since being a comic you can kind of do a little bit more than you can, with a movie budget. Since there is no movie budget, you can just draw what you want, and it feels a little bit cheap to just go the route of a big red button on the back of the suit. Disabling the suit means that Metallo lives to fight another day, and Superman is left to go and meet with Luthor, since they have a little bit to discuss. I've had my suspicions over the last couple of issues of this series, but now I'm beginning to feel like this story maybe wasn't as long as the editors had hoped, and it's been cut up and kind of stretched out a little bit more to make a certain number of issues, whether it be to meet certain quotas, like printing quotas, or maybe it's so they can then charge extra for when it gets put into a hardback, collected edition or something. I don't know, but this feels like it probably could have been done in maybe 4 issues, not the 10 or so issues, whatever this series has thus far. I think it's been changed quite a couple of times. So many of the plots have just suddenly disappeared from the book as well, like they don't exist, like Lois Lane's plot, who in the first issue looked like she was getting a little bit more page time than she did in the first series, and she would have her own story running concurrent with the main plot, with her exposing Project Metallo and running down leads on these Russians in America and all that sort of stuff. All of that is just completely gone from the issue, and it's it's even weirder when you consider in the last issue, the end set up that she was talking with someone, which the way the pages were set out was heavily implied to be Lex Luthor, and working with him to expose these Russians. So there's just so much you could have done with this character and given her a bit more page time, a bit more agency away from Superman, and they didn't, and that's really quite disappointing and really quite shocking for a writer like Vendetti, since he's usually pretty good with that sort of stuff and gives characters ample page time, but for some reason he just didn't do it here. Gavin Guidry's art continues to be an absolute boon for this series though. It looks fantastic and captures both Wilfredo Torres's original work on the first series as well as the look and feel of the Donnerverse movies really well. Gavin has a great eye for action as well. All the action in this book was fantastic, and I like all of the really wide angle shots and using like long, panels to show distance and show how Superman's being like battered across the page and missiles are being shot at Metallo and Metallo's blasting tanks across the page. It just looked really quite cool, and I really like that it had a sense of scale to it, a cinematic scale to it that you can imagine seeing in a film. So as the fourth issue of The Metal Curtain draws to a close, I can't help but feel a bit disappointed in it. I was really rooting for this series since the first series was really quite cool and a great take on Brainiac, and I was interested to see how they were going to handle Metallo and the Soviets in the 1980s in the Donnerverse, but it's just become a complete rush job of a book, and it feels like storylines aren't being developed as much as they should be. Some storylines just disappear from whole issues only to come back later on as if nothing happened. At least the art for the book is really consistent and probably the best part of the book so far. I'm going to give this issue a 3 out of 10.